Hello everyone, and welcome to my oral presentation discussing my thesis project for Capstone 4350. I have chosen the following topic to research because it has significant relevance to my own life, and because it could benefit a great number of people if conducted successfully. So let's jump right in and take a look at the topic. America's military today is a global organization active in every region of the world. It ensures its own national preservation while providing hegemonic security for countries ill-equipped to supply their own. The United States Armed Forces maintain traditional commitments to nuclear deterrence as well as provide humanitarian aid to regions in need. Consequently, it is imperative that its methods be adapted to suit the needs of the various regions in which it operates. Operating in a manner that is consistent with foreign cultural values is not a new challenge for military leadership. However, a growing affinity for collaborative operation with local populations has exposed shortcomings in our military's understanding of the people it engages with. Numerous incidents have demonstrated both an opportunity and a need for improvement of education among personnel serving abroad. Since the turn of the century, America's military has been encumbered with significant security obligations on the Asian continent, as well as complex treaty commitments with its allies. These commitments require armed forces be stationed in various concentrations abroad, oftentimes engaging in significant contact with the local populations. This interaction exists in several forms. In hospitable nations, military personnel are often allowed to immerse into the local population during downtime, which has had several severe repercussions which can be discussed in greater depth later. The other dominant form of interaction exists between military personnel and indigenous officials. This type of interface is extremely reliant on skillful communication and requires a high level of cultural understanding to achieve success. This type of communication is the primary focus of this research, and the goal is to investigate the cultural challenges facing America's military and determine a strategy, or more likely a set of strategies, to address this issue. This research is focused upon the second type of communication, which occurs mainly between military personnel and local officials. These type of interactions are becoming increasingly important in today's military strategy because the enemies that we engage with regularly today employ untraditional warfare tactics that negate the effectiveness of our traditional methods. These interactions serve to extract information valuable to the completion of military objectives, as well as influence indigenous populations, which has become a new ideological battlefront that the military must wage a separate battle on today. This is an important topic to research for many reasons. This concept is somewhat controversial and can be viewed from a variety of different perspectives. However, the purpose of this research is to achieve a more equitable outcome for all parties involved in these intricate relations by improving the way they are coordinated and executed. The improvement of these type of relations would likely increase operational effectiveness in the short term and develop more productive relationships with local officials in the future. The improvement of these relations should also decrease tension in the areas of conflict while increasing security for both members of the armed forces and those who they interact with. This topic is appropriate for my interdisciplinary study because it involves several of the phenomena associated with my three concentrations, which include political science, communications, and organizational leadership. Furthermore, I plan to pursue a career in the military after graduation, which makes this topic even more relevant to my own education. This issue requires evaluation from interdisciplinary perspective, because, in my opinion, because it is far too complex of an issue to address from a single disciplinary scope. This is due to the intricate nature of these relations, which are highly sophisticated and multifaceted in nature. Along with each of my own disciplinary concentrations, I believe that the academic fields of military science, cultural studies, and even sociology may have valuable insight to offer. However, in an attempt to conduct a coherent interdisciplinary study, I have chosen to narrow the interdisciplinary insight employed in this research to include just military science, political science, communications, and organizational leadership. Military science offers a considerable amount of insight into this issue because it studies the processes and behavior of the military. Through this disciplinary perspective, the problems facing the armed forces abroad can be resolved primarily by internal innovation. Political science is a potentially relevant field because it focuses on how power relationships affect outcomes. It offers considerably more diverse analysis of this phenomenon than military science does because it considers all the components as actors that can be influenced in various ways. Communications is another potentially relevant discipline because it deals with how information is transferred and what criteria are necessary for successful transmission. It is highly relevant when considering the societal communication and influence engagements that frequently take place today. Organizational leadership's disciplinary insight can be useful to addressing this problem as well because skilled leadership at all levels of the services can improve its operational effectiveness. Another essential component of successful interdisciplinary research is the process of considering the issue from each of the disciplinary perspectives you choose to employ. For the purpose of this video, I will consider the problem from the perspective of political science and communications. Political science views the problem as a breakdown of relations between military personnel and indigenous officials. In order to resolve this issue, some type of compromise or leverage, whether it is military or political, must be achieved to motivate actors within the system to proceed reasonably. This disciplinary view is highly complex because it requires an acute knowledge of the interests and motivations of each actor, as well as effective infrastructure to deliberate between them. Solving this issue of inadequate cultural understanding under this scope becomes increasingly difficult when one takes into consideration the complicated history and makeup of the region in which the military is operating. However, it does frame the possible solutions in terms of an exchange between the military and locals, rather than advocating increased aggression, which is the purpose of this research. One incident that effectively demonstrates the prospect of military-indigenous deliberation occurred in the notoriously lawless Korangal Valley region of Afghanistan in 2009. At this time, military personnel were conducting a search for a group of individuals known to be promoting anti-American sentiments across the region. In fact, the group responsible for the insurrection consisted of over 70 military-age males who were encouraging American aggression among the local villages by means of violence and economic exclusion. These villages generally function autonomously and abide by their own systems of laws and regulations. This complex arrangement of authority often presents considerable difficulty to military personnel attempting to influence the region. However, the decision to organize several large-scale gatherings between local authorities and military officials demonstrated a tremendous opportunity to utilize the predominantly non-militarized population to achieve military objectives. During the series of meetings, Army personnel deliberated with leaders from each of the major villages to determine a desirable outcome for all groups in the region. A consensus was reached that additional military aggression in the area served little purpose besides further destabilization of social and political processes. Furthermore, the majority of indigenous authorities communicated a desire for decreased military activity, which provided a negotiating asset to military leaders overseeing Korangal operations. An agreement was reached to expose the insurrectionists responsible for causing harm to the region in return for decreased military presence within the confines of the villages and greater representation in future operations. This compromise was a result of keen understanding on the part of Army leadership to assess the needs of the indigenous population and an advanced competency in cross-cultural communications. These meetings between Army personnel and indigenous officials ultimately resulted in the achievement of military objectives without subjecting additional personnel or equipment to violence. This incident clearly demonstrates the opportunity that these types of communications present if conducted properly. Viewing the issue from a communications perspective places emphasis on a lack of understanding between actors. However, this failure to successfully comprehend one another goes much deeper than just verbal communications do. Factors relating to religion, social status, and cultural customs often detract from the effectiveness of the message being transmitted. To further exacerbate the issue, deep cultural biases against Western influence are prevalent among many of the regions in which American forces are operating. To overcome this barrier, military personnel must adhere to the cultural norms of the region if they hope to be successful. Through my research, I have developed the following conclusions about military cultural education as it stands today. First of all, advanced cultural understanding among members of the armed forces is essential at all levels to achieving American military objectives in today's dynamic war zones. The increased prevalence of irregular warfare has created a need for alternative methods to address the new challenges the military is facing today. A greater reliance on collaboration and strategic influence has exposed the need for cultural competency at all levels, which is a challenge the military is attempting to resolve. Secondly, I have found that the efforts currently employed by the military to address these challenges fall short of providing the necessary skills to navigate in the complex foreign cultures that the military engages with. One researcher, Maxim McFarland, emphasizes the importance of exceeding mere cultural understanding in his research entitled Military Cultural Education by striving to achieve what he calls cross-cultural comprehension. He advocates for the creation of education programs that develop the capacity to negotiate foreign encounters with greater flexibility by developing the ability to contextually adapt to the diverse and changing conditions found in the combat zones of today. Researchers Allison Abb and Stanley Halpin support this viewpoint in their own research entitled The Cultural Imperative for Professional Military Education and Leadership Development by arguing that the current methods of region-specific and cultural general education only provide general understanding, which is insufficient for operational success abroad. They posit that a societal level approach fails to prepare servicemen and women for interaction at the individual level, while increasingly focused training only allows personnel to operate within specific niches. The primary conclusion of my research is that the efforts currently being taken to instill cultural comprehension are in need of improvement if this problem is to be resolved. My research advocates for the development of more comprehensive cultural education programs which view cultural norms and nuances dynamically instead of the traditional general and region-specific approaches that are currently employed today. Furthermore, I believe that a greater platform of research needs to be conducted continuously to provide more practical and relevant material to educate personnel in the future. This is because culture is not a static body of knowledge that can be studied over time. Instead, information must be collected constantly to ensure its relevance and accuracy. Another change this research advocates for is increased levels of cultural education for military leadership. This is important because military personnel serving in leadership roles have the highest degree of contact with local officials, and because their cultural insight can be transferred to their subordinates as it becomes relevant. These changes are intended to increase general cultural understanding across the forces, while amassing high levels of cultural comprehension and leadership that can be utilized accordingly. They are also intended to bolster the cultural ability of the entire force, which is the primary focus of this research. Thank you for taking the time to view my presentation and learn about this important and complex issue. I hope that my research has been insightful and stirred an interest in each of you to resolve this crucial challenge facing the armed forces today.